So did I ever mention I worked on Batman Returns? Oh, we should talk. So way back when I was still trying to break into the industry as a voice actor, I was working behind the scenes in motion pictures. Now, I had been to film school and I knew film production, so I did just about anything you could possibly think of. I cut film negative, I shot animation cells, I did time-lapse photography, I swept the floor of the sound stages, made the coffee, ran the errands, you name it, I pretty much did it. And I also had a chance to work at a couple of really cool visual effects studios right about the time they were making that transition from practical effects like motion control and miniatures to digital effects, computer graphics. And let me tell you something, that was just a really chaotic time in our industry because nobody really knew if all this digital stuff was going to work. I mean, we were flying by the seat of our pants and crashing and burning on a daily basis. I used to keep a sleeping bag stashed in the screening room because I knew I'd have to spend the night at the studio babysitting some computerized gizmo that was just about ready to give up the ghost if you didn't watch it all night long. So I was working at Richard Edlund's studio. Now, you probably recognize Richard's name as being one of the original sort of founders of ILM, Industrial Light and Magic. They did all the effects on Star Wars, Empire, Raiders of the Lost Ark, all that good stuff. Well, Richard wanted to move back to Southern California and open up his own studio, and he called it Boss Film Corporation. And they did things like, Die Hard, Ghostbusters, you've heard of those, right? Well, that's when I was there working on this little sequel film they were doing called Batman 2, which you probably know as Batman Returns. So, what was I doing on this film? Check out part 2 to find out. So in addition to all the practical effects we were doing on Batman Returns, Boss Film also had to deliver a number of shots that had computer animation in them, specifically computer animated photorealistic penguins, which was not an easy thing to do back in 1992. There wasn't a whole lot of off-the-shelf software for that sort of thing. A lot of people were still writing their own code. So let me show you a picture of the entire Boss Film digital effects department at this time. And there we are, all 6 of us. Yep, that's pretty much our entire crew. I think one person might have been absent on picture day. But this was a really talented, very hardworking group of people. Let me explain to you a little bit about who you're looking at here. So off to the right in the white shirt, that's Jim Rigel. He was the department head, a really talented guy. You're probably familiar with his work. He went on to do the visual effects for the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And next to him is another talented person, Mary. She had this great pug dog who was a bit of a troublemaker, but kind of became our unofficial mascot. Next to her is Colin, a super smart guy. He was the first person Jim hired for the department. Now, down in the front row is Andrea. She's working on a wireframe model of one of the penguins. Next to her is Andy. He originally came on board to write some brilliant animation morphing software for us. Now, one person not pictured is a young production assistant named Dave, who we recruited to help us get through all this craziness. Originally, to assist the overworked guy on the far side of the screen, yours truly. Now, I didn't know anything about computer animation. In fact, I didn't even own a computer at this time, but I did know motion picture film. And they felt that the department needed somebody as a coordinator between digital effects and the rest of the shop, and also someone to handle all the motion picture film related stuff, including digitizing all the scenes shot on set to get them into the computer so the animators had something to work on. So, how do we go about doing that? Stay tuned for part 3. So to give you an idea of what we were up against doing digital effects back in ye olden days, let me bring up this shot from Batman Returns. This is PN4A. This is the scene where the penguins converge on Gotham City. And off to the left you can see the bright red neon sign of the Shrek's department store. Now that was an actual physical set piece. Well, this was a really complex shot and it kept getting kicked back to us by the studio. But not because of anything that had to do with the computer graphics. It had to do with the fact that every time we output this shot, that neon sign looked more orange than red, and the studio said it doesn't match any of the other scenes that it's in. Okay, well that's a pretty simple fix, right? I mean, I could throw this shot into Photoshop and change that sign any color that I wanted. But in 1992, things were not that simple, and every time they tried to adjust the color of just the sign, well, It just wasn't happening. So I was sitting at my desk trying to decompress. We'd just come out of dailies, having had our shot rejected once again. And I was flipping through a couple of magazines. I think it was American Cinematographer and CineFX. And in one of them was an article about the making of an old film. I believe it was The Ten Commandments. And in it, there was this blurb that said in one scene, they had changed the color of different parts of the shot by using colored filters in their optical printer. And I thought to myself, well, wait a minute, that's the problem I'm trying to solve. So I ran down to the motion control stage and I grabbed one of those Roscoe gel swatch books that has all the samples of the different colored gels you use on the stage lights. And I ran upstairs and I grabbed my trusty X-Acto blade and I cut out tiny gels of each of the shades of red in the exact shape of that Shrek neon sign. And then I mounted them in these little metal frames, filter frames, that slipped into the optical printer head of our scanner. And then I scanned each one of those until I found the exact match for the color of the sign. And eureka, I found it. Okay, so all's good in the world. All I have to do is redigitize this scene and the animators can get back to work. Well, hold on, not so fast. Wait till you see part 4. So we're getting ready to scan PN4A for Batman Returns, but before we do that, I think I should show you the scanning camera that I keep talking about. Yeah, that thing was a nightmare. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what you're looking at before we move on. So that middle section is just a standard optical printer head. It's kind of like a movie projector. There's nothing even remotely experimental about that. That's the part of the machine that the film travels through while it's being scanned. And in our case, the film was not the original camera negative. We were scanning RCPs, registered color prints. Now, the mechanical engineering department just took that off of an old optical printer that they weren't using and put it on that breadboard and built our scanner rig around that. Now, off to the right, that sort of rectangular metal box, that's the Contron medical imaging camera. Around this time, if you wanted a film scanner, that wasn't something you just went and bought off the shelf. A lot of people were building theirs from scratch. Well, we didn't have time to do that, so we found this Contron camera and we sort of repurposed it for our scanner. Now, off to the left, where the lamp house should be but isn't because it was giving us all kinds of problems, is just a standard Mole Richardson stage light. I just took that from one of the motion control stages, plopped it down there behind the optical printer head. You can see I taped a piece of diffusion to the front of it and then clipped a fan to the whole thing because it was getting so hot I thought we were going to start melting film and then we really would be in trouble. Okay, so now we got this thing cobbled together. It's time to start scanning film, right? Well, hold on. Stay tuned for part 5. Okay, so we're finally ready to start scanning this scene so the animators can put the penguins into it. But, as usual, there's a couple of last-minute things you need to know before we get started. This scanner takes 7 minutes to scan each frame of motion picture film. Yeah, that's a long time. Now, motion picture film runs at a rate of 24 frames per second. So a 5-second scene is 120 frames. And at 7 minutes per frame, well, that translates into 14 hours of scanning time. And let me tell you, a lot of things can go haywire during all that time. But our biggest problem was dust floating down from the ceiling and in the air and just attaching itself to the film while it was being scanned. So that all of a sudden in the middle of your scene, dots would just magically appear on the screen. So in order to prevent that, we had to make the room really airtight and static free. And the problem with that was anytime you opened the door, it would change the air pressure in the room. Not a lot, but just enough so that film that was being scanned would buckle ever so slightly, throwing it out of focus, and you'd have to start the whole scan over from scratch. So when I was scanning, I had signs plastered all over the door. Keep out, danger, do not enter under penalty of death, because, I was getting prematurely gray just from trying to get this shot out the door. But we got the scene scanned, and the animators got the penguins put into it. Now the last step is getting it out of the computer and back on to motion picture film. Now, how do we do that? Stay tuned for part 6. Okay, our final step is one that most filmmakers don't even have to worry about anymore, and that's how do I get my scene out of the computer and back onto motion picture film so I can screen it in the theater? Well, the way we did that was with something called a film recorder, which was essentially a high-tech CRT tube that beamed the image back up into a motion picture camera mounted on top of it. And we had different cameras that we could swap out for the different film formats we used, everything from 35mm all the way up to the really big stuff like 65mm. And And let me tell you something, trying to mount that ginormous old Mitchell 65mm camera on top of that film recorder was like trying to lift a boat anchor, and a really good way to throw your back out too if you weren't careful. But anyway, let me show you this. This is the digital slate for the final version of our shot, PN4A. Look at the date, May 19th, 1992. Batman Returns came out June 19th, 1992, so we were cranking out shots right up until the last minute. I mean, boy, you want to talk about the studio breathing down your neck. I mean, thankfully we got everything done on time for the premiere. As a matter of fact, I still have my program for our big screening at the Grauman's Chinese Theater. Inside it has all of our lovely credits. And there's a quick little story about that too. So Richard Edlund asked me, what do you want your credit to be on this film? And I thought, man, you know, I spend all my time with this crazy scanner gizmo. Nobody even knows what that is. How about something modern sounding like digital camera operator? And he was like, oh yeah, digital. All right. So I think I'm the very first person to get a digital camera operator credit on film. And it was the same credit I got on Alien 3, which was a whole other set of adventures. But anyway, I hope all you digital artists out there appreciate all of us who are on that very sharp cutting edge, who shed more than our share of blood to help get us where we are today. Because, man, it was a long haul. But like I said, thankfully, there was just a lot of really terrific people at Boss Film. As a matter of fact, some of the very first voice acting jobs I ever did were on projects at Boss. But that's a story for another time. I think we should relax and maybe rewatch a little Batman Returns. I think you're going to watch those penguin scenes in a whole new light. I'll talk to you later.